Hello and welcome to the fall workshop for the sophomore class. My name is Jeff Ream and we'll be walking you through, along with Jennifer Jingo Cohen, a back to school session that you can watch at your convenience to help guide you through an important year that is the sophomore year. So throughout this presentation, you'll be hearing from both myself and Jennifer as we kind of walk you through the important aspects of how to make the most of this 10th grade year. So this 10th grade school year is a important one for continuing the consistency that hopefully you started in ninth grade. As we develop the 10th grade sense of self, you're going to have a lot more opportunities, some more additional challenges, maybe a little bit more rigor. And it is a big growth area, not only for academics, but also for your student, their brain, their maturity. And it's a big shift. You'll hopefully notice a big shift during this 10th grade sophomore year. And so as we go through this presentation, keep that in mind. It's starting to connect the experience of working through a high school experience and then connecting that to their future selves. How will this experience while you're in high school directly relate to what you want to do when you eventually finish high school? There are four key things that I think will be important that we'll spend some time talking through with you today in this presentation. The first one is staying on track academically. We want to make sure that we remind you and the students about their requirements, both for graduation and for understanding this thing called the A through G requirements, which are the introductory and basic requirements for essentially the four-year college process. Going over a couple of the possibilities that students will eventually want to explore as they navigate towards those after high school plans, and then how to balance the different commitments and rigor and expectations related to schoolwork as you're navigating through 10th grade and then moving towards your 11th grade school year.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Jango Cohen, and I'm also a school counselor at North Tahoe High School. Working with your school counselor is a partnership, and staying connected is one of the best ways to make that partnership work. Students may reach out whenever they need support, whether that means scheduling an appointment for dedicated time to talk, using the counseling website to find resources and forms, or simply asking a question. And remember, it's always better to ask early. A small question or concern can often be addressed quickly before it grows. Effective counseling support involves everyone playing a role as well. Families can support students by staying informed, encouraging them to seek help when needed, and helping them stay engaged in the process. And school counselors are here to connect students and families with the resources and support they need, whether that's related to academics, social and emotional well-being, college and career planning, or community resources. When students, families, and counselors communicate and work together, students are better positioned to make informed decisions, navigate challenges, and take full advantage of the support available to them. As students move into sophomore year, they're beginning to take on more independence, and that means each person in their support network has a slightly different role. The goal is to focus on supported independence. Students aren't expected to figure everything out on their own, but they are increasingly responsible for taking ownership of their choices, responsibilities, and goals. For students, this is a great time to start thinking about possible college and career paths and to develop organizational systems that work for them. Most importantly, students should practice asking for help when they need it and recognizing when to take responsibility for their own next steps. For parents and guardians, the goal is to encourage and support without taking over. Conversations about life after high school can start now, not because students need to have everything figured out, but because exploring possibilities helps them to begin to understand what they might want for their future. Parents can help students stay on track while still allowing them to take the lead. Throughout this, counselors are here to help connect students with resources and opportunities, advocate for their needs, and support both academic planning and future goals. The balance is really about helping students build the skills and confidence they'll need to become increasingly independent while knowing they still have a strong team behind them.
Sophomore year can actually be fairly challenging. It's usually where students get caught between not being that first time kind of jittery freshman walking into a new school building, not quite understanding. Everyone tends to start ninth grade a little bit kind of conservatively. They're maybe not as comfortable yet, and so they follow the rules usually. They want to do their best, and they start with this fresh, clean slate. Sometimes 10th grade can be a little hard because students are not new to school. It's kind of a new year, but it's the year where they're kind of transitioning from I'm not the freshman, but I'm not an upperclassman yet. And so they're not totally where they're able to navigate through high school fully independently quite yet. And so it kind of creates a couple of these challenges that you can see on the screen here. So the first one is this idea of overconfidence without information. So the brain works, and we'll talk briefly about the brain in a second, but the idea is that sometimes students want to be, these sophomores want to be treated like an adult and have adult level responsibility in decision making. However, their brain and the information they have access to or want to pay attention to sometimes is not always in alignment. So students tend to make quick decisions, sometimes big decisions, without maybe considering all the information or listening to the information that's available to them from trusted or wise adults around them, whether that be their family or their teacher or their counselor or their administrator or a combination thereof. The other thing that sometimes kind of comes up is the second point down there, which is losing urgency. So this is the idea that, again, that ninth grade focus where I'm gonna turn a new leaf if I maybe didn't have the greatest middle school experience, or like this clean slate approach sometimes can feel a little bit tarnished in the sense that they have a set of grades from their ninth grade year. They have developed kind of an identity at school to some degree that maybe started out really strongly in ninth grade and maybe changed by the end of ninth grade for some reason. And so sometimes students roll into 10th grade feeling a little bit kind of stuck in this pattern. So there are some things that become more routine, more habitual. Maybe it's not showing up to class on time. Maybe it's spending too much time on their homework. And so there are some routines and habits that we want to address in the 10th grade as well. A lot of times we also look at students who are having short-term thinking for big, long-term processes. And so identifying how do we, and this is again a brain thing, this is not necessarily always poor decision making, but it is something that we as the adults really need to be aware of, and helping also students be somewhat aware of this process that's happening for them as well. Because when a student makes a decision, I don't want to do summer school, for example, but that lack of summer school and credit recovery would impact their ability down the road to apply to a college that maybe they had their eyes set on, because they don't want to give up their summer, and rightfully so, but it's something that we want to pay attention to as the adults in their life. And that goes along with like that difficulty with connecting their choices, making decisions about what they're doing with their time or their lives or their money or their talents, and connecting that to the after high school outcomes is also a fairly crucial piece. Okay, so it is something that we want to developmentally start moving some of this decision-making process more towards the student in 10th grade. So you'll start seeing them having a little bit more responsibility, as well as potentially consequences for lack of that responsibility. But we want to, it is an appropriate time to start allowing them to develop those decision-making skills. And sometimes that means they're going to make potentially poor decisions. And that's part of that growth process. Like I mentioned, the sophomore brain and the teenage brain during this typical 10th grade age group is in a unique spot. It's a challenging spot to understand as an adult, but we all went through this phase, and the brain is not fully developed, generally speaking, until about age 24, 25. And the biggest piece that is not developed and is going through a maturation process while students are in high school is this area called the prefrontal cortex. And that's the front part of the brain up here, where basically students are utilizing complex connections to make the future decisions that they're going to make. How does that impact their current life? And unfortunately, and what we see in teenage brains is that they're very focused on the here and now, and there's little ability to actually connect what they're doing now to the things that will be coming down the road. And that's where we see issues with things like planning, lack of organization, their impulse control, so their ability to withhold and not go, jump into the lake when it's really cold or something like that. That might be dangerous, or driving too fast. Poor decision making oftentimes shows its head. Prioritizing important tasks that maybe are multi-step processes where like, oh, I know I need to do my rough draft because then I have to do my final draft, and that's going to impact my overall grade for the semester, and that long-term thinking. So it's going to be something that being aware that your teenager is going through this process is really important, because not everything that they do or decisions that they make directly relate to their own conscious decision-making process. It's just important to know like that they will not be fully formed in their brain until, probably after like a typical collegiate year. And so when they're an adult, usually starting in that workforce. So it's something just to be aware of as you're navigating and talking with your teenagers, that it's not always up to them. Sometimes there are literally pieces missing that prevent them or really diminish their ability to make some of those good choices that we would hope that they would make. And we as the adults on the other side of this maturation process sometimes forget that, we have the benefit of having that fully formed and fully functioning brain in our heads that let us look 3 or 4 steps down the road, where sometimes they have trouble doing that. Okay. So sometimes what that looks like in actual practice is like, again, making decisions based on what feels like the most important thing here and now versus potentially what that impact of that decision would be down the road. They'll need some help understanding the processes and building in systems that help them make those good decisions. So helping break those big processes down into smaller chunks will be really important in the 10th grade year. And so helping them potentially prioritize, helping them work on a calendaring system. And we'll talk some of these different tools and tips a little bit later, but that's something just to be aware of. And benefit from that adult structure and feedback, but giving them the autonomy to work through some of those things. And so it's a fine balancing act. And students will be in different places. It's not all students hit this point in 10th grade. It's not this magical barrier. So some students this will happen later. Some students maybe have already experienced this, but you'll notice a shift. And we notice it often in school too. So hang in there if it's a frustrating year for you last year or the start of this year, but just know like there is still growth and development happening in your student, and we're excited to see this happening. We're going to work with them on that.
Sophomore year brings a shift in academic expectations. One of the biggest changes is understanding that studying is more than simply completing homework. Academic preparation requires more intentional effort and often more planning. Students should review their notes regularly, not just the night before a test. Going back over material throughout the week makes it easier to understand and retain what they're learning. Reading also becomes more active. Rather than simply completing an assignment, students should engage with the material, annotate as they go, and make sure they understand what they're reading. When it comes to quizzes and tests, preparation should begin in advance. Setting aside time to study over several days is much more effective than trying to learn everything the night before. The same is true for long-term projects. Instead of waiting until the deadline is approaching, students can break larger assignments into smaller steps and work on them over time. And if something isn't making sense, seek help early. Visiting a teacher during RTI or asking questions before falling behind can make a significant difference. And finally, stay organized. Keeping track of assignments, materials, and deadlines consistently becomes increasingly important as academic demands grow. One mindset shift to consider is just because there's no homework due doesn't mean there's nothing academic to work on. Reviewing notes, reading ahead, and preparing for an upcoming assessment or making progress on a long-term project are all valuable ways to use that time. Another important part of sophomore year is protecting the academic foundation students are building. Sophomore grades matter. They become part of the academic record that colleges may review, and strong performance during this year can help keep future opportunities open. At the same time, struggling in a course does not mean a student's future is determined by one difficult class. What matters is recognizing challenges early and taking action. When students fall behind in a foundational course, it can affect their ability to move into higher level classes later, and waiting too long can make recovery more difficult. So if a student is struggling, the first step is to address it early. The sooner a concern is identified, the more options there are for getting back on track. Students should also use the academic support available to them. RTI, tutoring, and peer support can make all the difference. Asking for help is not a sign that a student isn't capable. It's a strategy for becoming more successful. And if a student is concerned about a grade or meeting a requirement, they can speak with their counselor. There are usually options for grade recovery, additional support, or alternative pathways that students may not be aware of. So remember that one difficult course does not define a student's future, and taking action early can make a difficult situation much easier to manage. As students plan for their future, there's an important distinction to understand. Being on track to graduate is not the same as being on track for A through G eligibility. These two pathways overlap, but they have different requirements, so students should monitor both throughout high school. First, there are high school graduation requirements. Students need to complete the required subject areas, earn the required number of credits with a D- or better, and meet any additional local graduation requirements, such as community service hours. Earning a diploma is an important goal, but it doesn't automatically mean that every post-secondary option will be available. Then there's A through G eligibility, which is specifically designed to prepare students for California's public four-year universities. Students must complete the required A through G college prep coursework and earn a C- or better in each of these required courses. These requirements are used for eligibility for the California State University and University of California systems. Since there are some differences between graduation and A through G requirements, students may be on track to earn a high school diploma while still needing to address an A through G requirement. The good news is that students have time to make adjustments when they identify a gap early. The goal is to keep both tracks in view, graduation and A through G, so students are building as many options as possible for life after high school. Now that we've established that there are differences between graduation requirements and A through G eligibility, let's take a closer look at what the A through G requirements include. A through G is a sequence of college preparatory classes that students need to complete to be eligible to apply to California's public four-year universities. An important detail is that students must earn a C- or better in each course for it to count toward A through G eligibility. There are 7 areas labeled A through G. A is history and social science with 2 years required. B is English with 4 years required. C is mathematics with 3 years required. Additional math is also encouraged because it can strengthen a student's preparation for college level work. D is laboratory science with 2 years required. Again, additional science is recommended, particularly for students interested in STEM-related fields. E is language other than English, where students need 2 years in the same language. Continuing beyond the minimum is also recommended. F is visual and performing arts with 1 year required. And G is college preparatory elective with 1 year required. The important takeaway is that A through G is more than simply counting years of classes. The specific courses matter, and students need to earn at least a C- in each qualifying course. That's why regularly checking in on a student's academic plan and A through G progress is so important. Counselors will engage in classroom lessons and use individual meetings to further map out student progress in alignment with A through G.
10th grade also comes with some academic adjustments. In particular, the academic bar tends to get raised. And you'll notice this each year going through high school typically. Junior year tends to actually have the highest level of academic jump for most students, but 10th grade is generally a significant one. And some of the reasons would be they tend to have more academic subjects, so we add history to the mix for 10th graders. We also have the ability to potentially take 1 or 2 AP classes, which are advanced placement courses, which we'll discuss a little bit more in a few slides. But it will be something just to be aware of that the expectations and rigor related to 10th grade tends to be much higher than in ninth grade. And so a couple things that are going to be really, really important is that studying will become more than just completing assignments. It'll be more than just completing things that you're expected to do by your teacher for a grade. Academic preparation is really kind of what you're going to be doing. And that's really when we say the word studying, we tell students you should be studying for this amount of time. It really is broader than just a homework assignment. There are a couple listed things here that I'll just briefly mention, a few of them. One of them is notes. So a lot of times we have teachers who will maybe lecture or provide opportunities to take notes. The notes are meaningful a lot of ways. One of them is actually in the moment. So there's research that says when you do multiple things with information. So if you hear it, that's one thing. If you see it, that's another. But if you physically are writing notes, it helps your brain make different connections and retain that information longer and better. But that's one impact of note taking. But the other impact of note taking, and one of the things that we think students probably miss out on, is the ability to then review those things later. They're not usually just a one and done. And so really kind of like working on this note taking process, especially if students are interested in pursuing college down the road, notes are very, very important. Preparing for assessments, it goes along with notes. That's something that I think is becoming a lost art in a lot of ways, of especially in the world of test retakes or redos or corrections or things like that. Of sometimes tests are something that you will kind of identify as a growth area and maybe have a chance to redo, but there are other examples of exams where it's a one-time shot, and so your preparation process becomes really important so that you can do your best work on that one-time shot. When we talk about preparing for assessments, I would encourage students to go into the process of preparing for a quiz or an exam like it's going to be a one-time shot, to put in the time and energy, because that not only builds the skills to help you be successful later, it will hopefully help you perform your best on that first go. And sometimes students go into it kind of assuming that they'll have this opportunity for a retake, and almost like this first time test taking opportunity, if for say a science test or something, it is almost a preview of the exam. And I want to encourage students and families, do your best to kind of dedicate time. And it's not something that usually students do their best on their assessment if they just, they study for an hour the night before. Bigger tests should probably take a decent amount of time to prepare for, and really review notes and review practice problems and prepare for this assessment. Quizzes or other short, pop quizzes, things like that, maybe less time. But like if it's a midterm or it's a final exam, students should probably spend, a little bit of time in the weeks coming up to that exam date to get ready for that. And it's a skill that has to be developed as well. Finally, is the stay organized piece. That one is going to be important as students, again, develop this more academic rigor going through 10th grade, developing a process to track assignments, working on a calendar system, similar to maybe what I've mentioned in prior years. Try not to do everything all at once. Part of staying organized is not getting overwhelmed with your organization system. It's going to be important that students potentially pick one thing. What is a challenging class for you that maybe it would be a good place to start getting organized if you haven't yet? Or if you've begun the organization process, what's one way that you could add an additional step to potentially improve your process? Maybe you organize the binder. How do we then maybe extend that to maybe let's work on a calendar. Let's work on a system to tracking assignments. Okay, and then the little note down there, just I don't have any homework, should probably not be something that you hear from your students. They very well might not have any assignments that they need to do that night, but they should have something that they can do academically. That might be reading. It might be doing some self-driven research or exploration about something they're interested in related to an academic process or project. It could be college or career exploration. It could be working ahead and reviewing notes or preparing for a test or a quiz. So GPA is actually something that starts to become a little more interesting for students in their sophomore year. GPA stands for grade point average. And hopefully you've heard of this before, but if not, a grade point average is just it's an indicator that we utilize and colleges utilize and other people might reference, and it gives basically an overview of how your experience in your high school performance has been throughout whatever frame of reference we're looking at. GPA is something that is a little tricky though, because when you look at your Aries account or you look at your transcript or you talk to different people with different points of reference, they might ask about GPA in a different way, or we might present GPA in a different way. So on a high school transcript, we actually have 6 different ways that we actually represent your GPA, and different things will be important for different folks depending on what they're looking at. I'm going to briefly describe those things, but there's some videos that we can also share that have a little bit more explanation with kind of how the GPA points work and how your grades work in relation to that GPA. But 2 fairly big buckets that you'll notice GPA being broken down by is either your academic GPA or your total GPA. Okay, the academic GPA, that's going to be focused primarily on that college preparatory or A through G level coursework. Okay, so those are going to be essentially all of your A through G classes that are college level, or not college level, but college preparatory level. So a few exceptions, so like pathways, PE, a couple, learning center class, an ELD class, things like that generally do not fall into this academic GPA area. Most other classes, chemistry and histories and things like that, will all typically fulfill and dump their points into this academic GPA. Total GPA is basically the cumulative total amount of GPA, including all of academic or non-academic GPA. So that's just going to be something to notice a difference of, and you will see the numbers and points look different. Additionally, you'll notice also that you'll see a weighted GPA and an unweighted GPA. A weighted GPA, students will receive additional GPA points for grades of C or higher in things like an AP class or a UC transferable college class. So that's where you'll notice some of those differences, and that's where students can say get above a 4.0 GPA, for example. Why does sophomore year really kind of come into play and matter and start kind of being this year where GPA kind of starts to really kick in? The primary reason is because the A through G, when we look at the CSU and UC system, they look at GPA just like with our GPAs on our transcript in a lot of ways, but the freshman admissions GPA, they're primarily focusing on that sophomore and junior year GPA for their overall calculation of that entry-level freshman application GPA that they're going to be looking at to help review student applications. So they don't actually look at that 9th grade set of grades in your overall standard GPA calculation. They will look at your grades, they'll look at the courses you took, but they do not factor that into that GPA. Okay. They also want to see trends. So maybe 9th grade wasn't as strong. If you trend up in 10th grade and keep that going through 11th and 12th grade, that's going to be something that they want to pay attention to. Please also note that our internal GPA is a calculation that we have established. It's something that every school kind of establishes their own metrics for GPA. Weighting looks different at different schools. We do not weight honors courses, for example. Other schools do. Some schools have, quarter point GPAs for this or that. And so that GPA is really an internal calculation for us. College systems may recalculate GPAs, so don't be surprised if maybe their GPA looks different on an application system, or if you're having to enter your student reported academic record, it could calculate GPA slightly differently because of their own internal policies.
Another opportunity students will encounter in high school is advanced placement or AP coursework. AP courses are designed to be college-level classes taught in a high school setting. They follow nationally based College Board curriculum, move at an accelerated pace, and typically require a significant amount of independent preparation. AP courses are meant to be challenging. Students can expect more independent study than they may be used to in a standard course. At the end of the year, students also have the option to take the AP exam associated with the course. There can be several benefits to taking AP courses. Depending on the college, the course and exam score may allow a student to earn a college level credit or place out of a general education class. AP courses also give students experience with the expectations of college level academics and can demonstrate that a student is willing to challenge themselves. AP courses should be chosen because a student is genuinely ready for the challenge, not simply because AP looks impressive on a transcript. More AP courses are not necessarily better if the workload becomes overwhelming and affects a student's overall academic performance well being, or ability to be successful in other areas. The goal is to find the right level of challenge for each student. A thoughtfully balanced schedule is more valuable than taking on more than a student can manage.
So as I mentioned a little bit earlier, 10th grade tends to be a year where students academically start to increase their rigor and increase their workload. And we want to, at North Tahoe High School, encourage challenging yourself as a student. It's going to be important for you to push yourself, but doing it in the appropriate and right fit. Okay, so on the left side of this screen, you can see a couple examples of what a healthy, rigorous load looks like. Okay, courses that will stretch a student's ability without totally overwhelming them. Students should not feel bogged down by their course load all day, every day. If that's the case, that's probably an indicator that maybe students are overcommitted, either broadly or specifically related to their academic experience. Okay. Healthy rigor also considers past performance, but also doesn't necessarily rule out that students can change and improve. Okay, so we don't want to necessarily say like, oh, you haven't taken any AP classes and maybe you shouldn't. Maybe a student's ready for that. Maybe they're ready to take that on. It also should look at all courses. So when we talk about individual course advising, sometimes we'll look at, hey, I could say the student is ready for any class at an AP level, but when we factor in all of the classes, sometimes it doesn't always make sense. Okay, so we want to look at individually, are you ready for this particular course? But also, how does that factor into the overall level of commitment that you have at school, what you're taking on, your bandwidth just across the board? Do you have sports and family responsibilities and work as well that would potentially impact your ability to be successful? Some overcommitted consequences, the costs of kind of committing too much, is that the stress and workload really has an impact not only on their academic ability, but their mental health, their friendships, their energy, their sleep. Usually one of the first things that students tend to sacrifice when they actually get too busy or overcommitted is sleep, which is the counterintuitive place where sacrifice needs to happen. A sleepy or tired student is going to sacrifice their abilities across all of the other things that they're doing in their life and their day, whether that's school or their sports team or their ability to show up positively at work or at home. Okay. Taking more AP or advanced honors level classes is not always better if the student cannot manage them successfully. It does not always look good to take a bunch of classes and then kind of do mediocrely in them. A student who is doing really strongly in a well-balanced set of classes is oftentimes seen or portrayed better in an application, or whether that's a job application or a college application, for example, than students who are taking all of the hardest classes they possibly can and potentially struggling a little bit in those classes. And that, again, means more than just struggling in the classroom. Sometimes it's struggling outside of school or not being able to be a well-rounded student because the only thing you can do is your classes. Okay, so our goal is for that appropriate challenge. It's not the most rigorous schedule that we could potentially build for a student, and we hope that that's something that we can kind of help students navigate through. College testing is something that is a changing environment, and while this video is something that we kind of address broadly, we do send out yearly specific updates in a very, very short nugget. So I'm going to cover this information, but pay attention to some of the annual updates that we're going to be sending out related to the particular class and school year that we're in, because it is a fluid landscape. In general, there are two primary tests that students pursue related to college admissions and college testing. And that's going to be either the SAT, ACT, or both. And so students will typically take the SAT and or ACT sometime during their junior year. 10th and 11th graders at the North Tahoe High School have the opportunity to take the PSAT, which is the preliminary SAT, or practice SAT as I prefer it. And that really is something that students have an opportunity to kind of sit for their first true kind of in-depth experience on what an SAT could actually look like in their life. And they get some scores back, they get some feedback, and it will help them understand and plan a little bit for how they want to approach any college admissions testing. Know that the college admissions testing landscape has shifted since COVID, and it's continuing to shift. Vast majority of colleges are either what they call test blind or test optional. And those are going to be policies that allow students more choice. Test blind is going to be a policy where it's, regardless if you have a perfect SAT or ACT score, it's not going to help you in their admissions process. They're not going to be considering those exams. A test optional, which is much more broadly what we see now, is where students get the choice whether they want to submit. If they feel an SAT could be helpful in their admissions process, they can choose to include that in their application or not. And I think that is actually the move that is most student friendly as well as helpful in the college admissions process. Some schools are moving more back towards a test required process where students have to submit an SAT or an ACT score during that admissions cycle during their senior year. And so being aware of that will be kind of important. Okay. So don't stress or obsess about these tests in 10th grade. This is going to be something that definitely encourage. Think about taking the PSAT in the fall of 10th grade, but it's not something that you don't need to do test prep yet. You're focused on building the skills in the classroom. Those are going to be things that are going to be most beneficial in helping you be your best testing self. But thinking about how you study, for example, like that's a good test prep skill that impacts your abilities in the 10th grade classroom. How are we preparing for standard exams? How am I noticing how tests impact me? You know, if tests are the worst thing possible for you as a student, maybe that doesn't mean that the tests like the SAT or ACT are going to be an important factor, or it's something that comes into that decision-making process as we start doing college and career exploration.
As students begin thinking more seriously about life after high school, one resource they can use is SCOIR. This is our college and career planning platform. SCOIR is designed to help students explore who they are, what they're interested in, and what possibilities might be a good fit for them after high school. Students can invite their parents to join this program as well, and this can lead to more meaningful conversations. Students can use SCOIR in a few different ways. First, SCOIR can help students discover more about themselves. Personality and interest inventories can help students identify their strengths, interests, and preferences and begin thinking about what environments or pathways might fit them. They can also explore careers and colleges. Students can research different institutions, majors, career pathways, and other opportunities all in one place. And as students get closer to the college application timeframe, they can use SCOIR to plan for their future, stay organized, and eventually manage parts of their college application process. Most importantly, students do not need to know exactly what they want to do yet. Sophomore year is a time for exploration, not having all the answers. SCOIR is simply one tool to help students start asking questions, explore their options, and gradually build a clearer picture of what they might want their future to look like.
College and career exploration actually does begin now. And so when we start looking at 10th grade, 10th graders actually spend quite a bit of time doing some career exploration, which is actually where that college process begins. Because if we don't know where we, in the broadest sense of the word, where we're going, we won't necessarily know what schools or programs or majors or things like that will potentially help me get there. Okay, so it is not too early, and we will spend time in pathways and in different avenues helping 10th graders navigate through some of this initial college exploration process. That typically does not mean that we're building college lists. We usually will not be doing that in 10th grade. We will start broadly looking at what opportunities are out there, what are different types of colleges, what are the aspects of colleges that will become important to research. And then also spending time connecting their career exploration. What are some different types of careers or career clusters or pathways that maybe I'm starting to find myself interested or drawn to? And how will I make that connection to what that means in relation to a college list? What are the majors that I need to potentially explore? What are the things that are going to be helpful for me as a 10th grader, making again those long-term plans and connections, both from my interests and goals, but also how does that next step after high school help me reach those goals? Some ways that will help do that is attending college events. So that might be local college fairs or case studies. It's working and connecting with college representatives who are on campus. We have visitors that are here regularly, especially in the fall timeframe. Don't just walk by those as a student. They're usually tabling outside of our dining commons when they're here. Stop and ask questions. Regardless if you know about the school, have any interest in going to the school, there's always information that you can glean from talking to some of these representatives on campus. It takes 1 or 2 minutes, probably at most. Pick up some pamphlets. You can start getting some information because you want to kind of understand what the landscape is out there. There are over 3,000 four-year colleges across the country, and vast majority of students probably could name less than 100 of them. And so exposing yourself to the different opportunities out there will be a super, super helpful and crucial thing, because sometimes the school that is the perfect match for a student is one they've never even heard of yet as a 10th grader. So open yourself up to the different opportunities that are out there so that we can help explore those different paths that students maybe have available to them.
As mentioned earlier, students must complete 30 hours of community service as part of our graduation requirements. Community service hours are spread across all 4 years, which means students shouldn't wait until their senior year and try to complete everything at once. Staying current each year makes the requirement much more manageable. The expectation is 6 hours during freshman year, 8 hours during sophomore year, 8 hours during junior year, and another 8 during senior year. Before beginning a volunteer activity, students should make sure they follow the school's approval process. Not every activity will necessarily count, so it's important to confirm that the service has been approved before putting in the hours. Students should also track their hours as they go with our community service form. Keeping a record throughout the year is much easier than trying to remember where and when they volunteered months later. And if students have questions about finding opportunities or making sure their hours are properly documented, they can work with our college and career tech for support. As students complete their community service hours, it's worth thinking beyond simply checking this requirement off the list. Volunteering can be an opportunity to explore interests, develop skills, and become more connected to the community. The most meaningful experiences are often those that students genuinely care about. Students can start by connecting service to their interests. Maybe they're passionate about the environment, animals, working with children, the arts, or a particular career field. Finding service opportunities related to these interests can make the experience much more engaging. Service also helps students build real-world skills. Showing up consistently, communicating with others, taking responsibility, and building relationships are all skills that carry over into school, work, and life. At the same time, students are contributing to real needs in their community. Service gives them the opportunity to make a difference while also learning more about themselves and the people around them. And for students who are beginning to think about careers, community service can be a great way to explore a career path. An experience in a particular field might confirm that it's something they want to pursue, or it might help them realize they'd rather take a different direction. Both outcomes are valuable.
So when we talk about getting involved on campus, there's a couple levels to that. One of them is kind of just doing things to kind of check things off the list, adding to your resume, completing your community service opportunities. But I want to add the with purpose, because that's actually an important piece for sophomores especially. So hopefully they've become available or aware of the different available opportunities with some of the sports or clubs or leadership opportunities on or off campus, different community jobs or opportunities for volunteering, and thinking about what are the things that I want to invest my time in. Investing means you're going to put in that energy and effort over time to see some of that growth and output. So athletics is one that about 75% of our students do. It's a very, very common, but also very, very awesome way to get involved and have purpose and community on campus, support cool schools culture and our community activities that students really loved, and it's healthy as well. So athletics are a very, very important piece. It doesn't mean you have to stick with a sport just because it's something that is purposeful for you. If you want to dabble, you totally can. Clubs and leadership are also a great way. The leadership has a class program, but you could also be a leader in a club or start a club. And so there are a lot of ways. We have a Clubapalooza opportunity that usually happens each fall, where the clubs on campus currently can show you what they're doing, and you can choose to join a club. If you feel drawn to start a club, you can absolutely do that as well. participating in some of the different arts, or performing or visual arts outside of school, but developing portfolios. All those kind of things will help you if that is something that is a niche of yours. One of the areas that I think is an important one to start developing a purpose in is related to work and community service. Work and community service are going to be things that students, they don't have to work, but they have to do community service to graduate. So trying to find an opportunity that kind of aligns with maybe what your interests are, what your skills are, maybe what your future goals are will be helpful, not only for helping you understand a little bit more about yourself, but also for helping develop your resume, helping develop application. It shows commitment, it shows reliability. Okay, and so hopefully we can connect those two things. Not always possible, but it's something to keep an eye out for and think about what is something that I can kind of see about maybe developing a long-term plan for my community service. And you can work with our career technician to help maybe identify what those opportunities could be in our community. But keep that in mind as a student in a family. So individual learning plans are something that we continue to do each year. ILPs is oftentimes what you'll hear us call them, but that's what ILP stands for, is individual learning plan. And these are things that each year an individual learning plan tends to look a little bit different. We focus on a little bit different of the different areas as we again move towards high school graduation and preparing for the future. So in ninth grade, we tend to focus a lot on academic planning, developing good kind of foundations. In 10th grade, we start bridging the gap between kind of just like developing this foundation of academic skills at high school, which we do spend some time reviewing and reflecting on. But we start to kind of dabble into more of connecting that to kind of like, where are some of the things that are starting to interest you? What are some of your goals? How are we working towards some of these things? And then connecting that also to how the academic plan actually builds into helping you move towards some of those goals. And developing a plan, because after 10th grade is 11th grade, and that tends to have a lot more choice and opportunity in relation to academics, opportunities to challenge yourself, I won't say very many more opportunities, but a lot more opportunities to maybe make choices in terms of particular types of classes or areas of focus of classes that you want to pursue. So we talk about a lot of these different things, review where you're at, and start working on where you're going. And so in 10th grade, oftentimes these 10th grade ILP meetings will typically happen sometime in the winter, early to midwinter to the springtime. And it's an opportunity. It's not something we require, but we highly encourage it. And we want to make sure that students are working and progressing towards their goals. And we spend a lot of time talking about that during these ILP meetings. So as we start to wrap up this workshop, we just want to review kind of what the game plan is for the sophomore year. So once again, we're going to try to make sure we're maintaining our grades and keeping our good habits moving forward. That's not to say any backsliding or little blips in the radar are not something that can't be recovered from, but it's just going to be important to know. That's one of our main goals, is to kind of keep the progression moving forward. If there were any backslides or issues that popped up in 9th or 10th grade, we want to try to address those and repair anything there. Okay, so whether that's credit recovery, summer school, making scheduling adjustments, things like that. We want to challenge students appropriately. We do encourage students to maybe take that next step. If a student is ready for it and they're interested in taking on that challenge, let's challenge ourselves appropriately. We want to explore the opportunities that are available to us locally, as well as kind of like in the bigger picture future opportunities, whether that's planning for a college or understanding a trade school. Maybe I'm going to go on a field trip to look at what an apprenticeship might look like, or go to Chico and check out their college campus to kind of get excited about what that could look like. So exploring those different opportunities. We're going to participate and hopefully meaningfully throughout 10th grade, and then keep that going throughout 11th and 12th grade. We're going to serve and making sure that we are keeping up with our community service hours and opportunities. And just because we require students to have 8 hours in 10th grade doesn't mean that's a limit. You can do more than that. And that, again, is an extracurricular activity that, again, can build into something like a college portfolio or a resume. We are going to find balance, okay? And that includes all aspects of our life, prioritizing sleep and wellness and health. Because if you're not well rested, if you're not healthy, your ability to fully participate in all of the other things in your life, whether that be school or athletics, is diminished. Maybe not gone completely, but you're not at your optimum performance levels, and we want you to be there. And so finding that balance. And sometimes what's hard is, as students get older, Usually these things don't disappear, they just take up more space. And sometimes what that means is actually really looking at your priorities and understanding sometimes I can't do all the things I used to be able to do, and I have to focus or I have to reduce some of the responsibilities that I am involved in, which sometimes can be hard for students or parents because maybe they're all important to you, but we have to kind of really maybe focus in a little bit. And then connecting. Continue connecting with teachers, your educators, your counselors, your administrators, your friends, your community partners that you've been maybe volunteering with, because these are the people that will also help pour into your process down the road, whether that be a job application, a college letter of recommendation, keeping you aware of maybe a scholarship opportunity, and just also making high school a easier to navigate process. Having connections is really, really important. So part of that is also just students being aware and available, and also taking that step. Adults in your life will oftentimes make those inroads where we can, but it definitely helps when students are open and kind of seeking out those opportunities too. So I encourage you to do that.